Samwise7RPG ended up posting a video not too long ago. 13 questions Tim would like to ask you specifically on the nature of RPGs. Apparently, he's kind of gathering some information, and I'm kind of curious on what he's going to do with it later on, but we'll see the results in time. Now, admittedly, this video is taking a little bit longer to get to, not because I'm actually giving these questions any thought, but because I'm kind of behind on a lot of side projects right now. So sorry, Tim, but you understand, brother, it's priorities. So let's get right to it. Okay, the very first question. Can you please describe in detail any negative situations that came about in your life because you played RPGs? For example, were you ever bullied, belittled, made fun of, told you were going to hell because you play those games, etc.? Yes, several times, in fact. But I'm going to describe the most recent. The most recent was because of me. I will fully own up to that. We were playing in a Pathfinder game, and the person who was hosting, what have you, did what he could, a serviceable game. Wasn't really my make, mostly because he wanted to play it like as if it was a game of Final Fantasy. Primarily, we have these screen situations where we'd be told what's going on. A little bit of a back and forth, but reality was it was getting frustrating because we'd spend 90% of the time in combat to get through half a dungeon, and then we'd have to come back, get through half more dungeon, get maybe about 5 minutes of role playing, and then we jump into the next dungeon. This wasn't exactly the kind of game I wanted to be involved in, but myself, I figured, you know what? Okay, he's at this point where he's kind of taking a break, and we'll switch up. All right, so I'll take the RPG stance, and I'll end up playing a game. Unfortunately, this ended up turning into a situation where I ended up either misinterpreting what he was doing or what have you, but quite frankly, it was getting to that point where I could not get him to keep attention at the table. He was talking to other players, pulling them their attention away from what was going on, and it was just getting to a point where if you're not interested in playing, just tell me. But he wasn't communicating with me, and I certainly was not communicating well with him up until a point where I did something incredibly foolish. In which case I ended up sending over text like, what the hell's going on here? And it did not end well. And I lost a good friendship on that. A friend that I ended up having. And it just turned into a case of, it was quite clear that our styles were not designed to mesh. It felt more often than not when we were hanging out and what have you, it'd be great. But as soon as we sat down at the game table, we tolerated each other at best. And I'm going to say it right now. If any one of you guys are in that kind of game, get out now. Don't make a big deal of it. Just pick up. The same for me. Thanks very much for the invite. Appreciate your time, but I got to go. And that's probably the one that's impacted me and my social group, one of many, in a way that just kind of really hindered. And this oftentimes comes about in ways that I really, let's just say there's a lot of regrets there, unfortunately, and it just happens. But you know what? Not all games are designed for all people, and that's just sad truth. Question number 2. What skills do you think you have personally improved upon by playing RPGs? Confidence and the ability to fake it till you make it. And primarily, my job involves me interacting with a lot of different personalities. Primarily, one of the jobs I was doing was bartending. If you ever want to end up seeing on how fast your personality can flip, bartend at a convention center. Because one day you're going to be doing something like Mardi Gras, which is going to be, really great party atmosphere, high energy, going to be a lot of people in different costumes, and it's going to be a wild and out ride. It's all good. Other times it's going to be a very formal function, black tie affair, in which case your personality needs to completely swap. Then you might end up going to high school graduations, in which case you got to be checking IDs and wondering which one of these kids are trying to swindle you. Your personality needs to be adaptive. And when you play as many NPCs as I do in my typical games, you will find that the ability to switch personality types to be more effective in a given situation helps a lot, especially if you're playing a character that is very relatable. And you need to be able to create that connection. If you can create that connection on a dime, just it makes life so much easier, and it makes your communication skills that much stronger, and it helps out in all areas of your life. And I think that is probably one of the best skills you could possibly take from an RPG. Number 3, who introduced you to RPGs, and what was your first experience like playing them? Oh, I can remember that because I still have the box set right up there. Dragon Quest, a Advanced Dungeons & Dragons board game. Your character sheet was not a character sheet, but a card with all the information on the back and who this person was. You would be given cards that would represent the magic items, the regular loot, the coins, and all this kind of stuff, and you would just go through this dungeon. And this dungeon was a playmat that was all corridors and rooms, but no doors. You had to start in this room on this map, okay, and there's a door here, and the kobolds are here lying in their, filthy beds that contain like a small pouch of gold and minor item. You might get like a mace or something like that, and that's about it. You would go through these notations, and I remember playing this. I was 7 years old, and my old man didn't play RPGs, but damned if he didn't try and end up running that. He actually sat down, and I remember this, for 4 days, going through every rule book that we end up having, because it comes in 2 sets. It comes with the rules, and then it comes with the module. He'd end up going over there, and he ended up taking a red marker, and he would just go through every one of these, trying to end up making sure, okay, I got to read this. I don't read this. This is an important piece. I need to know this for this room, etc., etc. And he would start us off, open up the book, and we'd start reading. He would read the descriptions, and then we'd move our pieces like a regular board game, because that's how I was initially taught. Not exactly the best intro to RPGs, because unfortunately this is a situation I think a lot of players are in, which is the blind leading the blind. People who don't know what the heck they're doing will pick up a book and then all of a sudden they just start playing, doing what they can, and more worried about dice roll and, well, I'm going to bluff him to get by. Roll, oh, that's 23. Does that make it? No? Okay. Well, I guess I fail that and move on. It wasn't until later on when I ended up encountering this one GM from a store called Campaign Outfitters, and his name was Stu, ran a hell of a game, and more than anything, he was the one who actually got me into role-playing, actually speaking as the character, speaking with that intensity that I love to end up bringing into characters. I love to bring into games. I like to end up getting right in there and just be able to change your voice, be able to speak in that slow, methodical, locked gaze intensity. And he's the one who ended up teaching me how to do that. What was my first experience like running a game? Okay, if you end up looking back at my videos, I have spoken on this one, and this hurts. This is a blow to the pride, but what it is that I ended up running a game in high school. Again, blind leading the blind, so I'm not going to claim this was at all good. But I just finished playing Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, so I thought the idea of this giant unstoppable force trying to chase down the players was a good idea, but I would end up using it as a beat stick for them. And I tried to lead to a story that was kind of coming back to it, this thing, and why it was chasing them and what they were doing. But reality, it was just piss poorly executed. It was just a terrible game. And to those who may, on the off chance, actually end up watching this video and who were involved in that game, you have my deepest, most heartfelt apology. Very off chance you guys are going to see it, but I figure I owe you that much. So why'd I keep playing? Quite frankly, it was the community that brought me back. Once I ended up moving out of my hometown, I started realizing, oh, there's other people who play these games, and what do we have here? We have a bunch of people sitting at the table playing these characters, and I mean actually playing in character. This was something I never thought of. Like, what game are you guys playing? Dungeons and Dragons. I remember playing that, but where's your cards? You know, like where's the cards that show your character? And all this? No. You end up using just dice character sheet. This is all the information you have. I'm like, what the hell is Thaco? Shows you what I remember. But yeah, that was probably the worst one I ended up running into. What was it like designing your own system? I would say the only time I did anything that's remotely close to that is I ended up designing my own location, Ashworld, which is for Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder. And that has a very unique way of going about death, primarily due to the mechanics of the fact that the soul can't leave the ethereal or material plane. So eventually everything comes back in one way or another to haunt you. So character death isn't necessarily permanent, but resurrection is hardly an option. Instead, you're more worried about being lost to the aether. The other one is in the setting I run, Winnipeg. Now, Winnipeg by night has a very interesting point in that in sub-zero temperatures, I treat the vampire, this dead thing, as an actual dead thing. I treat it like a piece of meat that's just has, instead of gone bad, is just maintained lightly through magical aura. But once you hit sub-zero temperatures, what happens to a chicken breast when you end up tossing it in the freezer? That's right, it goes solid. So in order to stop this, a lot of the vampires have taken to the point of finding a way to use this mechanic called Blush of Health, which would make you look more human, makes you have some warmth to your skin. You're still a little cold, but not supernaturally so. Well, they learned how to slow burn that, just to maintain their body temperature above freezing. So they still maintain their mobility, because otherwise the uninitiated tend to freeze solid after maybe half an hour of exposure, unless it's a really cold night, and fall over, get buried in a snowbank, and wait until the snowplow comes over, unveils their body during morning, and well, that's all she wrote. So you learn quick, and it makes a very interesting point of desperation. Desperation, more importantly, because blood is very difficult to find, and you're more likely to end up stumbling across somebody who doesn't want you feeding on their turf just because blood is that scarce at night. Try walking around in a city in the dead of winter and trying to find somebody you can feed on reliably. It's not exactly easy. So what is it like making your own setting? Okay, so let's, I'm going to end up doing some videos on this later on, but long story short, meticulous planning. Very, very meticulous planning. Not to say I'm trying to end up building so many plots. I have plenty of plots. I have plenty of NPCs that are trying to do their own goals and trying to maintain particular aspects, but you find that you're going to have to end up building a lot of different little tidbits. I have a file on my computer that has well over 120, 130 overlays, all for the city of Winnipeg. That's what I end up running, and I run it in this very format on Google Hangouts. Expect to see some of that soon. Now, the issue when this ends up creeping up is that you have to figure out how all these characters and all these places interact. What are the, like, what's isolated, what isn't, what is pushing against what. And when the players do this little thing, okay, well, that interferes with this, which interferes with this, which interferes with this. And you need to keep this in your head at all times. Who knows what, who doesn't know what. And trying to find ways to keep that straight has probably been one of the greatest challenges I have ever run into when it comes down to building a setting. I think that anybody who takes time to try and craft half decent NPCs will end up running into that issue at one point or another. Why do you think tabletop RPGs are not known about by a good many people in the public? Well, there's a good reason for that, but I think the biggest thing that's going to make that a hindrance is we are coming off of RPGs came out of a very odd situation. First of all, they were demonized. If you end up growing up in the 80s, you knew how that was like. And then something weird happened. As soon as that started to drop, as soon as that stopped becoming a factor, video games started coming in. Now, video games have a very interesting point in that they are played on your own time. You can choose when you want to play them. Most RPGs, you got to wait for other people to get around. And while it's a nice little social event, to play it week after week requires time dedicated to it. Meanwhile, if I wanted to, I could play some Team Fortress 2 on a moment's notice, and it wouldn't bother me whether I'm playing it with myself or, hey, you want to know what? A few buddies end up deciding to jump into a match. So I guess I'm playing the medic or the heavy right now. In short, the experiences that most people will associate RPGs were kind of negative out of the gate. Is the average person only knew about them for these particular reasons. Like, oh, you're, well, much like I believe your first question alluded to, you're in league with Satan if you're playing those casting fireballs. That's the devil's work. I play Necromancer, so what does that say about your old man? Well, anyway, I'm not your old man. Brain fart. Getting back on topic, this, I think, was probably the hardest part, is that you had this transition of people wanted to keep away from it because it was almost demonized, literally, to a point where there was an alternative that ended up coming up that was so much easier to access. I dare you to find, when it first came out, a computer that didn't have the freeware version of Doom on it. What do you think more people ended up playing? Again, right? It's a matter of, here's an instantaneous reward. Not to say that it didn't have its space, but what did you have to go past? You had to go through people ostracizing you because, you know, you're in league with Satan. You had to end up dealing with the people who wanted to end up bullying you because, you know, at the time, might makes right, which has made for the brunt of a lot of campaigns that are very interesting. You had a certain stigma about it and the people who played it. Ironically, the people who played it are social outcasts. Meanwhile, it's probably one of the most sociable games you'll ever run into. Go figure. I really do associate that problem with timing, but these are just ideas coming out of off the top of my head. What is an RPG, and why are these types of games fun? A role-playing game, at its most simplest form, is a game of pass the story. I'm not sure if anybody's played this game, but effectively you sit around the campfire, and instead of singing Kumbaya, I stay a part of a story. Then I go to the person to my right, and they continue the story. And then the next person, they continue the story. The next person, they continue the story. Comes back to me. I got to continue the story. And we just keep going to this till we eventually reach an ending. Except your part of the story is only told by the character you play as. So you get to act a little bit of improv. And you don't need to wait for order. And one person, instead of playing these characters, plays the world that they're interacting. Otherwise, that's effectively all it is you make an action, I tell you how it works. I tell you what you see, you react to it. You end up telling me what your thoughts are. I end up telling you how the world pushes back on you. It's just back and forth, back and forth. And the faster it comes back and forth, the more interesting it gets, the more intense it gets, the better the game typically builds up. That's my experience anyway. Why they're fun? I'd like to end up saying exercises in creativity. I mean, that's a fairly obvious one, right? If you have the mental capacity to imagine something like you do as a kid, you could play this game actually quite well, any of these RPGs. But I think it's more than that. I think it's because this hobby, amongst very few others, requires multiple skill sets. And it's challenging to maintain in that regard. It's interesting to see what comes up because what you're expecting on either the player or the person running the game's perspective never comes the way you want it to or you were expecting. It's always something different. And in turn, with a random element of chance that dice usually bring with them, you then get a story that is all on its own. It's an experience that can only be between these characters, these players, this setting. Because despite the fact we've all had to encounter orcs, one person's encounter with orcs might be, oh god, here's another 5 of them we got to slaughter, and then we got to end up taking their short swords and sell them off to the blacksmith. Or you remember that moment where you've been enslaved by them and brought into those foul pits to work the mines, and it wasn't until the one day where you decided to break your chains and rend yourself free from the service of their whips. Go figure. One way or the other, both are very different experiences, and yet both are effectively the party encounters orcs. So let that ruminate in your mind just a little bit. If you're going to teach a new player how to play RPGs, how would you go about doing that? One-on-one session. And ask them, what kind of character are you playing? What do you want to play? Help them out, help them build the character. And while they're building the character, take notes. Lots and lots of notes. And what you want to do is take those notes and find those small hooks that they may not have considered, right? Because you're helping build their character, you can end up asking the questions. Who's their family? What were their aspirations? What were they before they started adventuring or going out into the nights? What was it that they used to admire about the institution they're now fighting against? Who knows? Whatever your RPG of choice is, you take the time to let them know and let them create a bit of it. Is once they end up realizing that they're exercising that creativity and building it up, you start playing around with it and you start letting their character matter, and you let their character matter to the NPCs that you're playing, and you let them see this back and forth narrative that starts to ruminate. And once you start doing that, you start getting them to stop thinking about dice, which is what I find a lot of people their default leaning to. I understand numbers. I understand higher numbers is better. So I'm just going to go there. I'm going to go that because I understand it. I don't understand this whole acting the part situation. But if you can introduce them to it, get them comfortable in it, even if they're just going up to their ankles, just get them tempered to the water. They start to want to go in a little deeper. They want to end up diving right in, and eventually you'll end up finding that they are fully immersed in the games that you're providing. What age group do you think plays these games more than any other age? Hands down, I would have to end up saying my experience is 32 to 37. I find that we've had a few players that are newer and are coming in, which is great. I love seeing the new blood in the community. But I cannot tell you on how many players I've run into who are beards down to here and, trying to end up looking like a wizard, in reality looking like a hobo that hasn't managed to find a shower in 3 days. Have you ever been inside around a public table at your local game shop? You know exactly the guy. So I will end up saying that the age range is typically older, but that may change in time, and I certainly hope it does. What overall benefits do you think a person that plays RPGs has to that perhaps a non-gamer wouldn't have or would have less of? That's actually a really good question. Give it a few seconds to think. I know that I've been rambling for a bit, so suddenly I'm caught off guard with questions. Let me think this over. What overall benefits do you think a person that plays RPGs has that perhaps a non-gamer wouldn't have or would have less of? I think if applied right, you're going to end up getting leadership skills. You're going to get communication. You're going to get people who just have a stronger sense of empathy. Because unlike in the real world or any other bit, you might say you have a strong sense of empathy, but that is a trained skill. And one of the ways that it's trained oftentimes comes into play when you start playing RPGs. You have a understanding of the character you're playing or the NPCs you're portraying. So you start to think a bit like them. You start to wonder, okay, what are they thinking? What are they going to do? How do they do it? Could be interesting. And you start to see things from another perspective. You're a little bit more flexible in that regard. So when you're out in the real world, you can bring that with you. And you can actually empathize with the person beside you when they end up telling you a story. You start going into that mindset. You start treating it almost like a character in an RPG. You start thinking, okay, well, what's the motivation? What are they thinking of? What is their position on the world? What do they think about this, that, or the other? And it just develops. And as it develops, you start to understand that person. You connect with that person a little bit better. Again, communication skills. Have you ever seen an RPG session break out in violence, or have you ever seen with your own eyes people becoming more violent after playing RPGs? I have never seen it directly involved in RPGs. I've seen players who don't particularly connect well, and they start to get at each other, and they bait each other, and they just start building it up, and they start taking their frustrations with each other into an in-character situation. And yeah, it gets ugly, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't happen. However, I will end up saying that out of the 60, 70 odd games that I've played, I've seen it happen once, which, considering the lengths of games that I've played, hardly even a factor in my mind. But do you think RPGs are still seen as much of a negative thing as they once were? No. Ironically, though, there's a little bit of an issue with that, I think, because at least when they were negative, they were out there to and gain people's attention, because they were almost the forbidden fruit, right? Oh, you worship the devil if you end up playing Dungeons and Dragons, hurling fireballs and raising the dead and all that fun stuff. No. But now people have a different reason and a different thing to start picking on. Everybody wants to end up finding something else, the next big demon. I mean, if you're a horror fan like me, you know exactly what this comes from. You take a look at horror movies, comics, corrupting the youth and removing their innocence, that kind of thing. However, that got people's attention, curiosity. They, felt a little naughty when they were rolling the D20. Now, it's kind of regarded with a meh. And that indifference, I think, is actually more harmful than the bad press. Go figure. That's just my opinion, though. What does that matter? Anyway, Tim, there's the answer to the 13 questions that you ended up putting out. I'm hoping that this ended up giving you some food for thought, and I wish you the best of luck in the foreseeable future. You fucking gnome-loving bastard.